Good evening, everyone. I'm Karen Gimnick. I am the Associate Director of the Cohousing Association, and we are here tonight for a web chat with Laird Schaub. Welcome, Laird. Karen Hoskin, who's our Executive Director, is not able to be with us tonight. She had a family commitment, but we're glad to have all of you. So welcome, everyone. I'm glad you're all here. Laird is a process consultant of decades and decades and knows a lot, and he's probably does not need a great deal of introduction. He's here to talk about delegate or die. And I think that's all I need to say. Laird, it's up to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Karen. I have a cold right now, and mostly it's manageable, but if I cough, you'll understand I'm managing my health while I'm trying to be a dynamic presenter. So this topic is one that didn't even occur to me when I first got started in working with groups, but it became a theme where I saw groups struggling. And so what we're focusing on is the right relationship between the plenary, that is meaning the whole group, and subgroups, which could be a single individual as a manager or a committee. The comments today will apply equally well to either situation. And there's one of the common complaints with consensus, or in all its various forms, some kind of inclusive decision making, is that people feel exhausted by the amount of meetings or the amount of time spent in meetings. And one of the major contributing elements to that is often poor understanding about how to delegate. Plenary groups have to decide what is appropriate to be considered at that level, the level of the whole group. Whole group meetings are one of the most expensive things that cooperative groups have. It's everybody's there, and everybody's taking time away from whatever else they do in the world to be present for each other and talk about common interests. And very few groups, this surprised me, but I've discovered over time that very few have stopped and said, well, what is appropriate to be considered in the whole group? What do we think of as plenary worthy is the phrase I use. And so there's often a subgroup or even just one individual whose job it is, excuse me, to screen suggestions for what makes it to the plenary agenda. That group needs guidance from the whole group as to what that screen should look like. And so if you haven't had that conversation, it makes it awkward to know where is the line at which you're no longer operating at the plenary level and you should stop talking about it. This is the area in which groups stumble a lot, is they drop down. They may start at an appropriate level and they drop down into a level of detail where it's no longer necessary to have everybody's attention on the matter. It could be handed off for details and implementation to the committee or manager. And they, not knowing where that line is, the group crosses it, and then the fatigue results. You spent more time in that matter than you needed to, and then that weighs on everything else that's behind it, and you can't get on the plenary floor until they're done with that first thing. Not only that, but it undercuts morale in the manager's committee who thought, well, that's the work we should have been doing, and that's the part that interests me, maybe. And the plenary's taken that away from us. And so part of why I signed up for that role was to be able to handle those things, because I enjoy that detail or that aspect, and now that's not there for me. So it's a problem, and then that becomes hard to find good people to serve as managers or committee members, which means that if the work is not done as it should be, it falls back to the plenary. And so it's a cycle that can repeat itself. And so the very first element is deciding as a group what is appropriate to consider at the whole group level. And then giving that agreed upon screen to a manager or a committee whose job it is to screen suggestions for what comes to the plenary, for which aspects of the suggestion are appropriate for the group to consider. What makes it to prime time? And they should not be making up the answer to that. They should be interpreting what guidance has been provided to them from the whole group. So that's the first thing, is knowing and putting in place what's plenary worthy. I can tell you a little bit more. We have time. I'll easily be able to cover the presentation here in the time available and still have room for questions. I'll give you an example of what I think we should be talking about there. I'll walk through a few items here. I'm looking at some notes. For instance, if you ever have a conversation about you think it's appropriate to be looking, under what conditions should somebody should be looking at involuntary loss of membership rights because of egregious bad behavior? Well, that's not something you delegate. That's something that has to be considered by everybody. More commonly, that's a rather extreme thing. You may go years and never have that come up, or ever, depending on how people behave. But it can come up. Then another thing that will be more common is how to interpret your common values as it applies to a specific issue. It's not at all unusual to have things that you meant to all be coherent and collegial work together. In a specific situation, they don't. So for instance, somebody says, well, I want to put solar panels on the roof of the common house and generate some of our own electricity. That will be in line with our common value to be more ecologically aware. The ultimate impact of that will be lower buying utilities, will be more self-sufficient, will be greener. And that's what we say we are. Well, okay. However, that's going to raise HOA dues. You have to front the money. It may pay off in the long run, but up front, there's more cost involved, and you have a commitment, say, to affordability. That's another common value. See, so those two things don't play nice with that proposal. You've got an idea of like, it's in favor of one, but it stresses the other. So how do you balance those two? That's appropriate to be done by the plenary. Interpreting common values as it applies to an issue. That's not done at a committee level, okay? That's in fact, I'll give you a hint. If a majority of your time in plenary isn't spent on that kind of dynamic, interpreting common values as it applies to an issue, you're probably not using your time wisely. It should be over 50% of your time is doing that kind of work. Okay. Acceptance of new members. You may have standards for, I assume you do, for what is appropriate, to what qualities you want or things you don't want, whatever that thing is for new members coming in community. I think in general, the final approval has to be at the whole community level. What I'm worried about is the possibility that people can join the committee over somebody's objections is problematic, because now you're bound to work by consensus with somebody you never wanted to accept. So that sequence is pretty awkward. And groups do a lot of different things about this. So that's a whole topic I'm not going to go into here, but I would say in general, ultimate acceptance of new members is a plenary level thing. Adoption of strategic plans, approval of an annual budget, process agreements for how the plenary will operate, how the community will operate. Establishments of rights and responsibilities of members. Those are examples of the kind of baseline things that I don't think you delegate those things. You would talk about them. Anything you do in the way of changes to common values or mission or goals, that's going to have to be done at the plenary level. Now, if there's nuance like below that. How far do you go below that and still think it's okay to do it at the plenary level? And I'm in favor, as a theorist, of like, I want you to think about pushing stuff out to committee as far as you can stand. However, how do you do it cleanly? And I'm going to get to that next, but this first step to put in place is defining plenary worthy, so that you know, the idea is that you have a clear sense of, okay, we're no longer in that zone, which means two things. The group that's gatekeepers for what comes to the plenary are saying, well, this portion of what you want to come forward can happen at the plenary level, and once we get that resolved, we will pass it off to a committee. And the other thing is that it helps the facilitators know to what they're looking for as to when to remind the group that it's about to cross the line and no longer needs to keep working at it in the whole group. And that'll help a lot to pull the plug and move on. One of the nuances here from an energetic level is if the group is little hit or miss in terms of whether it has really good energy and what's going on. It's sometimes totally seductive to keep working an issue that you're making progress on for the sheer joy of riding a positive wave. And it drifts down into a level of detail because it's getting something done. And that feels so good. They really act inappropriately because they can't help themselves. And you can kind of understand, the way I think I'd want to approach that is learn how to have that experience more frequently at the higher level, and so that you're not tempted to misuse the time just to have something positive going on. Okay. The next piece I want to cover is what I call a mandate checklist. Whenever the plenary hands off to a subgroup, I advocate going through a checklist or a template of what questions do we need to address so we've crafted a clear mandate. And I'm going to walk you through this list that I've got. Again, I'm referring to my notes. And if you, there is a recording of this, so you can get them from that. You can also send me an email and I can mail this to you. So this list is everything that I'm about to read won't apply in every situation. And I'm not giving you the answers, I'm giving you the questions to ask. So that if you walk through it and create the answers, that'll result in a good mandate. And if something is not applicable in a particular situation, just skip it and go on. Okay, so the order doesn't matter. It's just, I'm just listing them here in the way that they occurred to me. First is the committee ad hoc or standing? Ad hoc means it's going to exist temporarily, usually to do a specific thing. And then once that thing is done, the committee dissolves. Standing means there's an expectation, there's an ongoing role, and it has work that's recurring. Okay, so then you have a question. Excuse me. You'll have a question of succession of members on the committee with the idea that you're not elected or selected for life. Okay. So if you decide which of those two it is, and then also if it's, you want to be clear how the ad hoc, if it's ad hoc, exactly what triggers the end of the committee. Is it just the accomplishment of its task? What is it? And then with its standing, you want to specify how long people who volunteer are expected to serve on a committee. All right. Now, let's talk about selection of committee members. It's good, in my view, to pretty much stop or work through what qualities are wanted from the people that serve on this committee. What things are we looking for? And this helps both in self-evaluation of people in the group who might put themselves forward to serve, and then also it helps the rest of the people in the community to think about, do the people that have put themselves forward do I think they have the qualities that we're looking for? It also becomes a basis that's very helpful when you get to evaluation, because we said, well, we were looking for X, Y, and Z, and you showed X and Y, but you didn't do very good on Z. So then it becomes not just a popularity thing where you're just saying, well, we don't like you. You say, the problem we have is we asked for Z, you didn't give us Z. And then it hopefully then is more about, we had a problem with what you did, not because we don't like you. And that makes it a little less personal and possible for the evaluation to be more constructive. So I think it's very important to go through what qualities are wanted. Now there's a nuance here that's important to keep in mind. Sometimes on a committee, it's important that everybody on the committee have a certain quality. For example, you've got a group that works with conflict resolution, and you want people who are good listeners and people who are discreet. That is, who don't tell stories out of school about what they heard. There's confidentiality that's involved, and you want people that you think you can trust with that. And you want everybody on that committee who has access to delicate information, is discreet. And so you want everybody to have that quality. On the other hand, there may be qualities that you don't need everybody on the committee to have, but you need somebody to have. So if you're on a finance committee, you better have somebody who can read financial statements and understand what they mean. But you actually probably don't need everybody on the committee to be able to do that. I mean, a person could be on there as a strategic thinker and as somebody who has good trust in the community. However, they may not be an expert on reading financial statements as long as they can understand the information and work with it. That's different than being able to understand the nuances of balance sheets and capital reserve programs and things like that. So you need somebody that can handle all of that, but you don't need everybody. So there's a difference between qualities that you want everybody on the committee to have and that you need some people on the committee to have. Okay, next. How will committee members be selected? I mentioned that a little bit earlier. The environment in most groups is that we have more slots than people, or people with available time. And so what happens is we pretty much are willing to take anybody who volunteers. And for some committees, I think that can be okay. But if you need high trust from the community to the with the committee members, that's not a very good. This is like committee membership selection roulette, where we just hope that the first people to put their hands in the air have the qualities we want. I would say to ask people to screen themselves for whether they think they have them, and I would use a more deliberate process, where a thoughtful process where the community felt that there was to get high buy-in with the people who are selected if high trust is needed. For instance, this would be true. I can think of two examples right away. One of them would be the conflict resolution group. If you have such a team, you want that to be more carefully selected than the first three hands in the air. And similarly for if you have a steering committee or coordinating committee, a group that is the ones who screen suggested items for what gets on the plenary agenda. Again, I would not use a volunteer basis to select them either. And for by the way, on that one, steering or coordinating, it's common to comprise that committee by taking a representative from all of your standing committees and make that comprise it. And it makes sense from the standpoint of you got a conduit with committees who are often the places where plenary items are generated. However, it's often very valuable to have really good chemistry among that team, and you have no control over that at all. If you're just taking the reps that come out of each committee, you're just taking a chance that's going to gel as a group, or that it would have the qualities that you want from there. So I don't think that's very good. Even though I understand where that comes from, I think you can get regular contact without having it embedded through a representative. That it is important to have good communication from committees to the plenary selecting agenda selecting group, but I don't think that's the best way to do it. So I think you should do something more deliberate. I am not going to take the time in this webinar. I have an answer for how to do this that's somewhat constructed, but and I've had groups do this and like it a lot, and it's what I recommend when high trust is needed for selection of a committee. I'm just saying, be aware that you need something deliberate there, and not just take volunteers. Okay. If there's time later, I can get back to this. I'm going to note that and go on, and this is something I could respond to if you want to send me an email. Okay, I'm going to keep going with my list, my mandate checklist. That was how members are selected. There's a question of what power does the committee have to self-organize? For instance, can it make decisions differently than the plenary makes decisions, or is it expected to do it in the same way? I don't think there's a right and wrong answer, but you need to lay this out. If the committee is expected to have a convener, which is usually a good idea, you need to lay out what that person's supposed to do, and it's usually good to actually, in the moment of launching a committee or striking a committee, it's called, you want to name the initial convener. That person can be changed. I think the committee should probably be able to have its own authority to change conveners to somebody that suits the way they operate. However, you can lay out the expectations of what the convener's got to do, so that the community can count on who do they contact when they want information about committee operations. And that's usually, the convener is a point of contact. This person has to be reliable and responsive and in the know. So the committee's got to come up with somebody that has that qualities. All right. Now, this is here I've got down here is like point number 6, is what is the committee expected to accomplish? This is the obvious thing. What is the work of the committee? What is its purview? What is its portfolio? What things is expected to do? In the case of an ad hoc committee, it may only be a single thing. In the case of a standing committee, it's often ongoing things, and it could be multiple things. It could be the outdoor space committee, and so they cover anything outside the houses that's in the way of a common area, and so it could mean lots of things. It means there's pedways, there could be a square or something, there could be vegetation and plantings that are managed, and there may be a wild space. There's lots of different possibilities of what could fall into that. So it may have many things it's covering as a standing committee, whereas an ad hoc committee may have many things or may have only a single thing. But you want to lay out what is its area. Next are the deadlines for when the committee's work is due. This may also include deadlines along the way. Like so far along, we may expect you to complete this in 9 months. We may expect a progress report at 3 months and 6 months. Something, I'm making up answers here, but you can see that the deadlines aren't necessarily when is a certain task expected to be completed. It may be what are markers of partial product en route to finishing the job. Next, what resources will be made available to the committee or managers to do their work? The obvious thing might be money. However, in addition, it may be labor from other people or collaboration from other committees. It may be access to information or tools. Resources can look like many things. What might be made available to help the committee do its work? If reports are expected, what are they supposed to address? How and to whom will they be disseminated, and when will they be due? This can be a big thing. It's the way in which people become informed about what the committee's doing. And some committees, amazingly enough, don't tell anybody what they're doing. They sort of operate on their own, and there was never an explicit expectation of reports, and they don't do them. And and sort of the classic one is sometimes the nature of the work of the committee is such that they're not necessarily, like for instance, if you're the maintenance committee in a group, which can be a very important and valued a committee, it often attracts to it people who like to work with their hands and not necessarily with their mouths. And so they may be very good at fixing plumbing problems and electricals, but not so good telling people what they're doing. And so nobody in that committee really likes to write reports. Well, they still got a responsibility or lay that out up front so people know it doesn't, again, you don't need everybody on the committee good at writing reports, but you're going to need somebody on there doing it, because the group is going to want to know what's going on. It's going to be a guaranteed strain point in the group if a group there's an expectation of reports and a group just blows them off. It's a problem. All right. Next, this is an important one and can go in different directions. What license does the committee have to make decisions without coming back to the plenary? When does it have within what box can it operate and make decisions that are binding on the group without having to come back for approval? And then at what point, the flip side of that is what kinds of issues are such that they do need to come back and consult. I mean, because it's now something unexpected came up, and while it's in their area, they have not been given authority to do that particular kind of thing without approval from the group. So they either have to expand their mandate or consider this as a one-off, but it's important that the group not make decisions that are binding on the group when it's outside of its bailiwick or outside of its authority. So you have to define this pretty clearly. It might mean a money total, you can't exceed your budget for the year. You may be able to move money around at your discretion within your budget, but your total amount spent can't exceed the budget without coming back to the plenary. It may mean that there's the expectation that you operate as green as possible. I'm just making up conditions here. And then, so you may have an opportunity to purchase a replacement piece of equipment at a really great price, but it's not very green. And so now what do? You look really good from the affordability standpoint, but not so good from the environmental impact standpoint. So this gets into a question of how do we balance common values in the group, which is really plenary work. And so you may have a definite preference, but do you have authority to do that? This is the question I'm raising. And so you want to think about what box can we let the committee or the manager operate within such that anything in there is okay and they can go ahead without coming back. And the bigger you can make that box, the less time spent in plenary on these issues. But it's got to be not so freewheeling that you're not going to regret the latitude you gave. So this is a question to consider. And for some communities are hamstrung in the amount of time in plenary because they don't give any authority to their committees to do anything other than propose. And so everything has to come back to be approved. And that just kills it chokes the plenary with stuff that, you have to decide, okay, this is too much. We have to start turning them loose to some extent. And I'm encouraging you to think about that. And that'll do a lot for morale in the committees too. If you meaningfully pass along authority from the plenary to the committee to act on its behalf, that they have to report what they did, but they don't have to ask for permission to act as long as they're within the box that the plenary created. Okay. All right. To what extent is the committee expected to coordinate or share authority with other committees? Sometimes a particular issue will come up where it says, hey, on this area, we want you need to do a joint work with a related committee. You have overlapping responsibilities. So this can be spelled out. Okay, now here's a big one. Is it clear how group members of the community who are not members of the committee can offer input on committee topics? It's common, just in the work I did 2 weeks ago with a group in North Carolina, there was frustration along these lines of they weren't getting reports from the committee about what they were doing. And so the person was trying to get information about it, and the committee was resisting, thinking that, oh, you're in our way, we don't have time to answer your question, we got so much important work to do. And this person felt like, well, I'm a member of the community, I have a right to know what you're doing, I may have input on your work. And there was tension because it wasn't clear whether the community was saying to the committee, you've got to have an access point for people not on the committee to be able to add input, not to control or that they could stop what the committee's doing, but there's a way for them to understand what's happening and to give timely input on it. And so this should be spelled out in the mandate so that both sides are clear on what the expectations are. And it also, the committee needs to be able to establish deadlines for input. Say, okay, we're going to work on question X now. If you've got input on this, you can come to the meeting on this date or send us something electronically in the next 7 days. And then the committee can go on. If you come in with late input, that's different than, because you had an opportunity. If you didn't use it, it's no fair hamstringing the committee. But you do deserve, in general, an opportunity for a channel to be known to you that you can use to get your input heard. All right, so there's that one. And that's the list, a pretty long list. If you answer all those questions I just gave you, you're going to have a drop dead great mandate. And that's a big, big thing in terms of clarifying the relationship between the plenary and the committee, this is where, not having clear mandates or complete mandates is very common. And I'm telling you, this is the answer. This is how you get to do much better on this. Take a little time. You'll get, it'll be a little clunky at first, but it'll pay big dividends in terms of you won't having to go back and clean up the mess later, and you'll get quicker at it the more you use it. And if you don't like the way I frame it, feel free to adapt it. This is what I've distilled. Don't feel like these are stone tablets from Mount Laird. Feel free to adjust these to suit you. Okay, let's move on. That was mandate. The next major chunk I want to cover is, I see we're already halfway through our time. I'll wrap up in probably the next 10 minutes, is minutes. This is not a very sexy topic. This is one that a lot of people doesn't get to the top of there. Let me pay attention to this list. very often. And yet it can be an important element in having things proceed well. And that means that the minutes need to be, of the meetings at which the mandate was created, for instance. It doesn't do any good to just have oral agreement on all these questions at a meeting if the minutes don't record it accurately. So the quality of your minutes become really important. And at the very least, they have to accurately capture the agreements. But the next level below that is, do you have a sense of the conversation that led to those agreements? Because if you don't have the reasoning behind the decision, you're gonna face a steady stream of people who came later or people who missed the meeting who say, why did you make this decision? And then if the minutes aren't good enough, you're just going on oral tradition. I'm not saying that's nothing, but that's easy to have different memories of. Even, if it's, well, I was in the room, so was I remember it this way, I remember it that way, and what do you do to resolve it? You don't have a written record where that could have been clarified in the moment is lost if you don't write it down. So there's what was the agreement and what was the thinking behind the agreement. This is especially helpful when people get to the point of saying, gee, should we reconsider this? My test is, well, what's changed? What's changed from what it was before? You may not have liked it, but this was our best thinking at the time. Are there new situations? Has the law changed? Have we got a different attitude about this now? Is there a factor that's been revealed that was hidden to us then? That kind of question. So the minutes have to be good enough, and then they have to be accessible. You have to know where they are. They have to be indexed. Fortunately, in this electronic age, that's not that hard. It's a little thought, so you can readily find relevant minutes when you need them. Okay. If you're having trouble finding, well, you should specify too, well, what do we want minutes to accomplish? There should be standards of that. And if you're having trouble finding people to volunteer to do them, consider going to your group of facilitators and asking for help, because it turns out that taking minutes is excellent practice for budding facilitators, because facilitator has to track a conversation and be able to summarize the gist of what's said orally, just in the way that a minute taker has to be able to do it in writing. So it's a good skill for budding facilitators to take minutes. Okay, I will go on. The next piece is, I want to talk about evaluation and feedback. It turns out that I'm of the view that it's really important for the lifeblood of the community to have minimal barriers of people being able to give each other feedback about how they are as a member of the group. That's a whole workshop in and of itself, but I'm not talking about individuals here, I'm talking about committees. It could be a manager, it's an individual, but I'm talking about authorized individuals. There should be an opportunity in a periodic way for the group to reflect on, how's that person been doing? And this is important for two reasons. First of all, we tend to underappreciate people who serve the group in leadership functions or do work on the behalf of the whole. And evaluation is a chance to celebrate success or to specifically appreciate people who have done their jobs. And that's something that's underdone in the communities. There's counterexamples, but I would say as a rule, when people volunteer to serve the community in some fashion, they should expect a starvation diet when it comes to appreciation. They're going to get more criticism than they're going to get supportive statements. That may not be how people think of them in general, but that's the diet they're going to be on. And so the evaluation, a periodically scheduled evaluation, whether it's once a year, once every 2 years, whatever, is going to be a chance to stop and say, thank you for serving the group, if they've done what they said they're going to do. Then, if you remember what we went back to the point I made earlier about specifying the qualities we want in people filling those specific roles, you get to trot that out. And there's two things that can happen during the evaluation. One is, was this the right list? Did the actual work that this person has been asked to do, or this committee's been asked to do, actually, do we name the right things? Or does it turn out some qualities aren't really that important, and maybe we need to add new ones? So there's adjustments that can be made to the mandate at the time of the evaluation. It may also be the work that you want to have accomplished has changed now. World changes, people, things don't stand still. So this is a chance to make adjustments. The other part of evaluation is, did the person do what we asked them to do in the way that we asked them to do it? If there's problems, it's a chance to get them on the table. In general, it tends to work better. My recommendation would be to have the committee self-evaluate first in a public way, so that everybody understands what they already know. You do not need to hit them over the head with the same criticism if they're already aware of it, and they can talk about how they intend to address it. You may or may not be satisfied with that answer, but I would let the committee self-evaluate before you opened it up to other comments. However, this is regular evaluations. I can't think of a single community I know who does this consistently. In fact, many just don't do it at all. And I think this is a missing piece, because then if there's no place to go with concerns, it builds up and then it starts to leak in other ways because there's no official way to go forward with it. In general, today, if somebody says, I want to do an evaluation of so-and-so, that's code speak for, I'm pretty pissed, because it only comes out when there's a problem. And then it's like, it doesn't have to be that way. And I don't even think it should have that flavor. Because like I said, it's also a chance to appreciate job well done. All right, I will move on. I want to wrap this up and protect questions. So the main two ways in which the committee performs in a way that's awkward is either they underperform or overperform. Underperforming is they're scared. They're scared to take on, lack of clarity about what they're expected to do or what their authority is. They bring everything back to plenary, and the plenary gets tired of it. It says, come on, we're asking you to solve some of these problems, don't come back to us. Maybe the mandate wasn't clear, maybe the selection of the people wasn't good, but they're cautious, too cautious in what they do. They're late in their work, or they're incomplete in it, and they drag their feet, and that, it doesn't seem like it's a lot of fun being on the committee, and the plenary's pretty upset with their performance. So it's not very good all around. The other side of this is the runaway committee, the one that says, well, all right, I saw how it's not pleasant to be cautious. So if we're uncertain, we'll just go ahead, and under the theory that it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. And so rather than get bogged down in a lot of process, we'll just use our best thinking, and we'll blast away, and then we'll expect the brilliance of our ideas carry us forward. And that might work, but it also can lead to what's perceived as power grabs and abuse of power. In other words, you've exceeded your authority, and even with good intention, that's not okay. That is not, and so they get criticized for coloring outside the lines. And then if they get blasted in the plenary, and they get a steady experience of that, that's demoralizing for them, and then they get tired and quit. So it's either way is a problem, and that's why clear delegation should help with either end of this, and then also good selection, careful selection of the right people. There is another aspect of this, which is it is common in some groups. This is a mixed story. It may not apply in your groups. It is not unusual for groups to expect a potential solution, a draft proposal to accompany an issue to qualify for getting on a plenary agenda. The good intent behind that is to ensure that the issue is sufficiently mature to be worthy of group's time. Insisting on maturity is a good thing. That's just not a good solution to it, because what it means is it's asking the subgroup to invest in a solution that is going to have to be reviewed by the community before the community's had a chance to say what the subgroup should take into account. And so if the subgroup innocently makes a mistake in what it takes into account, it can put a lot of time and effort into a solution that'll get shot down when it comes to the plenary, because somebody wants to bring in a factor that the community didn't think of. And that's not good. I mean, that is really hard on the committee. So I recommend not expecting things to come forward with a proposal. Just bring the issue and let the community decide what has to be taken into account before anybody starts working on a proposal, which may be the committee. But don't ask it to do it before the plenary's had a chance to look at it. That's a setup, and is also very strongly connected to the phenomenon of low morale on committees. And you don't want low morale on committees, in case you had any doubts about that. The last piece is a little bit tricky that I'm going to name, but it's important to bring it up. I can do it in a couple of minutes, which I call honoring the work. If a committee has been given a mandate, you do that, the best you can to make a clear mandate. The committee does its work. Some portion of the time, they're going to operate within what you gave them, and you're not going to like their work. They're going to come back and they did it, and they had authority. You gave them the authority, and you said, "Oh my God, I didn't think you'd do that." Well, you know what? As long as they did what you asked them to do, even if you didn't like it, you have to suck it up and say thank you. And the issue, if there is one, is going to be next time you're going to have to do better with your mandate. You may have had something that was important to you and didn't occur to you at the time of the mandate. And only the reality of what the committee came up with revealed to you, oh, I missed the boat on that. When that happens, don't take it out on the committee, accept that, oh, that's on me that I missed that. And be fair and honor the fact that these people did what you asked them to do, and not try to gut shoot them when they come back with some last minute thing that was, that was not the deal. And you're trying to change the deal and criticize them for the base of it, and that's not right. So don't let that be your committee or your community. All right, I am going to stop there. We've still got about 15 minutes left, and that was a download of Laird's Pearls of Wisdom on the topic of delegation. What do you got for me?
Well, chat so far has been quiet, so
I've overwhelmed them. Okay.
Yes. If anyone has a question, here's one from Jenny. How does this interact with sociocracy?
Well, I'm not an expert on sociocracy. I think so, but I have studied it, and I have worked with a few groups that have adopted it. I think that there's a high emphasis on delegating out. One of my concerns. Well, first of all, I believe sociocracy would advocate being very careful with mandates, which I would agree with. They're in favor of delegating out widely, which I'm in favor of. There's a tendency in some sociocracy groups to have a weak plenary, to where the plenary is not doing much of anything. And I don't like that, because there's certain things, especially energetically, that can only happen in the plenary in terms of what's happening in the whole group. I like what I would call a strong plenary and strong committees. And sociocracy doesn't necessarily lead to strong center. So that worries me. I think that their selection process for members of committees is naive. It asks for people who didn't know ahead of time to be available for public scrutiny in a public setting. And I think the maturity needed to do that well. Let me put it this way. I've been working in this field for over 30 years, and I've probably seen a group mature enough to handle open criticism in a public setting, which is needed to actually get a full discussion of whether this person is the right person on a committee. I've probably seen that twice in 30 years. Very few groups are that mature at this point. So I think what I mean is what's going to happen is people will not say concerns they have about a person coming forward because they're afraid it won't land well, or they're afraid there'll be a spotlight of critical things coming back in their direction. And you can't convince me that most groups at this point are mature enough to be able to handle that. So I don't think much of their selection process. That's a couple points. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, Henning says, you mentioned that committees should report. Is that written? What about verbal status reports at plenary?
I am not a fan of reports happening in plenary at all. I think reports should pretty much all be sent out electronically with, at an agreed upon venue. I mean, whether it's email or a listserv for the group or whatever, with the idea being the flow of information should be happening, but that's not a good use of plenary time, which is very valuable. Plenary should be for issues, and so, or for bonding of the group. Reports generally don't accomplish that. Somebody should be looking at reports, and then if there's issues coming out in the work that need plenary attention, that gets on the plenary agenda, but not the reports. So talk about issues.
Okay. Dominique says, what is the difference between a governance committee versus a steering or coordinating committee in terms of the ability to connect what's happening around delegation?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure. Governance, I have to hear a little bit more about what's the governance committee expected to do.
Dominique, do you want to unmute and chime in verbally?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, it's just we are noticing that it can be really challenging when we have something that crosses team boundaries, that nobody really has been given. We don't have a team with a mandate to oversee that connection and make sure anything is actually happening that's not within a single team level. And there's been talk in our group about having a governance committee.
Okay.
So I just
Well,
wondered
I'll
how
have
that terminology differs.
if you I'll answer orally now, but you could send me an email note and I could give you a piece of writing on what I think should be the mandate for what I'm calling oversight or steering. Don't get hung up on the name, and you can call it whatever you want, but it's the function in my mind would include things like it drafts plenary agendas, it monitors tasks accepted at the group level to see where progress is or where there's problems. It oversees strategic planning. It has emergency powers in case of, and you would establish the conditions under which that would happen. It's rare, but you can't make it up when you need it. So you have to put it in place before you need it, and then hope you don't need it. And then it would also do what I call handle a center field function, sort of a baseball metaphor, meaning that it is the committee. If you don't have a natural home for something, this group gets it until it's handed to somebody else, or they deal with it. But so they're the default group. If it doesn't clearly go somewhere else, it goes to them. Right. And I'm not sure I covered everything, but that's about what I think this group should do. So that settles the question of like, oh, does this ball drop between two different fielders? Well, if you're not clear that it goes somewhere, it goes to oversight. Okay. That's my take on it. Now I could imagine a role for governance committee in terms of, like, especially when you're a forming group around, well, how many standing committees do we need? And in other words, how do we want to organize this? And that would be kind of, that committee could probably go away after you established yourself. Because then at that point, you might make adjustments to that over time, but that'd be just a little bit here and there. But that committee would have a lot of work to do at the beginning to set, to make sure, all right, we have to start with nothing and we have to create some structure. And that group could do a lot of really important work at the front end, completing that. Mm-hmm. Okay, good. All right? Sure. Yeah, thanks. No problem.
Okay. Layla says, who should be responsible for making sure that minutes are recorded and stored / distributed electronically?
In my mind, one of the standing committees will be a process committee. Under that would be certain subgroups. One of them would be the facilitators. Another one might be a heart team or care team or conflict resolution team. Those are different. They're going to be different skill sets. There's overlap, but they're not the same. And then another one would be minutes. This is some group that's taking care of what are the establishing what are the standards for minutes, making sure we've got trained people to do the minutes. We know where they'll be stored, so everybody knows where to go to look for them. How will they be indexed so that we can pull out what we need when we need it? Where are they archived? That group would be in charge of all those things. I mean, this is not a high visibility group necessarily, or one that takes a lot of time, but doing that well is very important for the group. So it's a subgroup process I mean, you can organize, don't get hung up on the structure. I had this thing in my head about the way I put it together, but the important thing is that the need is met, not that you do it my way.
Okay. I'm not seeing another question pop up. You had tagged, I think, something about a selection process, that if we had a couple of minutes.
Let me talk about it then. Again, this is something I can give you a complete statement on if you send me an email. I'm going to go from memory here. What I like is a process like this. you identify what you're looking for. Selection of people to fill a slot, and it's 1, 2, 3, or however many it is, and that's known ahead of time. And you've done the work now in the group of establishing what qualities we want in people that fill these slots. Then you have agreement on that in the plenary. Then you pause and ask everybody to think about or reflect on, do you have these qualities, or enough of them to think you're a legitimate candidate for one of these slots? And do you have the time and motivation to do the work, even if you've got the qualities? So you have to meet all the, so are you going to put yourself forward for consideration because you think you're qualified and are willing to serve? From that, you would produce a ballot. Everybody in the community that self-nominates is on that ballot. And then you, from the people who opted out, did not put themselves forward, pick 1 or 2 people who are the ballot committee. This is ad hoc for this selection only. And then everyone is given a ballot with all the names of all the people who put themselves forward. And then you ask them in a very short time frame, 48 hours or something, to fill out your ballot, a physical ballot. And then, and then you hand it in to the ballot committee. And then you can vote for as many people on that list as you want that you think are qualified to serve. In other words, you'd be happy to have them serve based on your understanding of them and what you want from that committee, and whether you think that's a good fit. So that you can vote for 1 or none or all, whatever, it doesn't matter. There's no limit. And then you don't get multiple votes per person, but just 1 with as many people. Then you hand them in. Then the ballot committee adds them up, basically. And then whoever's the top vote getter is automatically the number 1 person on that slot. And then as long as that person is willing to serve with the next person down, the number 2 person gets on. And you're checking for chemistry here among the people. And so the people that are already on the committee can say, I don't think we're going to work well together. We don't have the right balance here for this person to be the next person. That process will pretty quickly produce, and they do this only with the ballot committee, basically. And then people are only known to be selected as they're, either the first one's automatically in, the next one down is with the approval of the top person and the ballot committee because they had the votes. And then you just keep working until you fill it. And then that is the committee. There's no further work. That is an announcement at that point, not a further review. And then at that point, that is the committee, and the ballots are destroyed, and the ballot committee is done. They no longer exist. Now that process, I've taught that in different groups, and it results always in a group with high support from the community. It's like, okay, we picked this group, and we trust this group, and that was the point. This is where high trust is needed. This is what I select you. This is what I recommend you do. It's going to be more deliberate. It'll take a few more steps, but in some committees, it's really worth it. So there's my trip on that.
There's your trip. And can you give a quick definition of how you know whether high trust is needed?
Well, you can just talk about it in the community. I mean, I think where, I talked about with, if it's a care team, a heart team, conflict resolution team, you get discretion and stuff. You want to trust people. They can hear could be really critical stuff, some really hard stuff, and it doesn't go beyond them. That kind of thing. That's because you trust it. They will not tell tales out of school. That's an element of trust. Another piece is in another committee that I think I would put in this category right away is the one I called oversight or steering, because they're just going to hear all kinds of stuff, and they have to be trusted to be really even-handed in how they do stuff, not playing favorites, no hidden agendas. And so you got to believe this group will be that way, because it's just really if you feel like the deck is stacked against you when you come into community meetings, you're going to either be an unhappy camper right before anything goes on, or you'll stop coming to the meetings, and then your voice won't be heard at all because you think the deck's stacked against you. So there's reasons to be really careful with certain slots.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, we have one last question, and then I'll wrap us up. Typically,
Okay.
how many different committees is a community member on? It seems like there are many needs for committees, and how many people in the community have the time? This is a good question. There's not a hard and fast rule, but I'd say
You know, 2 is probably plenty. 3 is stretching it. And I don't know how many slides. I mean, I get that there's a very uneven balance of availability, and some people like that kind of work more than others, are more drawn to it. I think if you're, you know, if it also depends on an assessment of how much those committees are seen as powerful or really key in the community. So if you're on 3 really key communities, it's that's probably too many. You're going to have to show, you have to narrow it down, I think, to like, there's a balance of like, not only to share, we're going to have to share this work. So we need other people distributing. And then also, I don't want to be looked on as a power monger. So I would say 2 is probably plenty. And now if your third one is, oh, I think I'm going to join the minutes committee, you're not going to get in trouble over that, probably. You know, some committees just aren't as seen as hotspots.
Great. And a question about where we can email you.
It's my email is my first name, LAIRD @IC.org. IC for Intentional Community. I've had it since 1994.
Wow.
I ain't giving it up.
So I put that in the chat.
Sure, great.
And Laird, if there's anything you'd like me to share with the recording on the website, you can just send me any of those documents and I will get them posted on the website with the recording. So if anything of that nature. Thank you everyone for being with us. Next week's web chat, I believe, is me talking conflict on Monday night next week. And hope to see you all back for that. And Karin will be along to host us for that one. If you want to support this program, certainly we could use some dollars into the organization to help cover our costs. And the link to do that is cohousing.org. That's also where you'll be able to find this web chat on recording within the next couple of days. Might happen as early as tonight. We're also just making a note. We're looking toward our 2020 events. So we got through our conference, which was great in Portland if you came. We're looking toward what we're going to be doing in 2020 and our welcoming input. Our intention is to do a series of smaller events, 1 or 2 days in a particular region. And so we're looking for folks who are interested in hosting those kinds of events, interested in helping with organization, or also just feedback of what you would like in your part of the world and what would be useful to you. Karin and I will be working in the next month or so to lay out a schedule for those. So if you could let us know soon, we'd love to hear from you about that. So I think that's the news from the Cohousing Association. Thank you again, Laird. That's fabulous information as always. I appreciate you being here.
You're welcome.
Good night, everybody.
Night.